Cuba, antiquated steam engines built long ago in the United States have been hauling in this year's sugar crop. For years, the main hard currency earner of Cuba's creaking, centrally planned economy. Officials say the harvest is better than average. That news won't throw much of a lifeline to the economy of Fidel Castro's 30-year-old Marxist-Leninist revolution. World sugar prices have slumped, and there's a sugar glut. After years of paying its debts promptly, Cuba has revealed that its economy is virtually bankrupt of hard currency reserves and is slipping deeper into the red. The annual sugar harvest is no longer enough to keep Cuba solvent. 30 years of Castro's unique revolutionary fervor continue to leave queues for almost anything on sale, including those most vital to daily life. All basic foodstuffs are rationed, like meat, cheese, and eggs. Unlike in some other Eastern Bloc countries, private enterprise or initiative to get round the shortages is forbidden. Police are now taking tough action against Cubans found to be profiteering from the state's conspicuous failure to satisfy consumer needs. What makes Western analysts so critical of Castro's economic policies is that things would be even worse in Cuba were it not for the vast amount of Soviet aid poured in since 1960, when the United States imposed its trade embargo. The Soviets guarantee to buy sugar at up to 7 times the world price. And they sell oil to Cuba at well below world prices, oil which Cuba then refines and sells on the world market as a way to boost its hard currency earnings. The level of Kremlin aid administered from the large new Soviet Embassy compound in Havana has never been published, but current estimates put it at £3 billion a year. Until recently, it's been assumed that through its many commercial and trade missions here, Moscow was happy to pour in aid without any Cuban accountability in order to preserve a vital communist toehold on the Americas. Publicly, however, senior Soviet officials deny this. They promote an image of great fraternal confidence in what they call our Cuban friends. But Western diplomats say that such Soviet answers mask real concern in the Kremlin about Fidel Castro. Moscow believes he may be unable to contemplate modifying the Marxist ideals which have kept him in power to the realities of the modern world, a world where, in Mr. Gorbachev's view, new communist versions of democracy and the profit incentive would generate prosperity. Castro rejects such Soviet ideas as ideological heresy. As the exaltations proclaim across Cuba, Castro's vision is not for a Gorbachev-style reconstruction, but for moral incentives, a return to the revolutionary spirit of the 60s. Invoking the memory of Che Guevara, Castro wants revolutionaries, not economists, to run Cuba. Fearing the emergence of a bourgeois elite, he wants Guevara-style egalitarianism, with no private enterprise or material incentives to corrupt his unique brand of classless society. What then is the Soviet view of Castro heading in a completely different direction to Mr. Gorbachev?
Perestroika is a Soviet term and Soviet phenomena, first of all. And that's why it's of no practical use to compare the processes which is going on in my country and some other countries.
Would you like Fidel Castro to be mirroring more precisely what you in the Soviet Union are now doing?
Why should I? I want Cuba to be Cuba and the Soviet Union to be the Soviet Union.
The Soviets also concede that any heavy pressure on Fidel Castro to reverse policy and implement a Cuban version of Perestroika will be counterproductive. But the sources believe that in the end, and in his own time, Castro will eventually have to embrace what he currently views as the destabilizing and dangerously imperfect ideological rethinking of the Gorbachev reform process. Cuba's defense forces are constantly on guard against those both inside and outside Cuba intent on undermining the revolution. The People's Militia, to which every Cuban adult must belong, was recently ordered to remain especially vigilant for what Castro called a fifth column of opponents inside the country. An apparent reference to agents or sympathizers of his long-standing enemy, the United States. He told Cuba's version of the Home Guards, this is a war against all the people. It's a war for the revolution's survival, which every corner of Cuba has been ready to fight by day or by night. In each neighborhood of every town or country district, there's a committee for the defense of the revolution, Castro's eyes and ears on every street. At night, local residents are expected to volunteer for vigilante duty. Quite apart from basic security against theft or mugging, all Cubans are encouraged to report to the committees any suspicious activities or unknown people they see inside the community. Although the security apparatus comes down hard on those guilty of criticizing the government, there are a handful of dissidents prepared to risk arrest or prison. Gathered in a garage one evening, these members of the Cuban Human Rights Commission prepare a letter to Mr. Gorbachev. Western journalists have previously been expelled for trying to make contact with this group. The dissidents say that although there have been improvements recently, Cuba is still violating 25 of the 30 articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Noticiero del Mediodía. Radio Martí.
The U.S. government's radio station, Radio Marti, now beams in from Florida. It's an alternative to the Cuban government's carefully controlled monopoly on news and information. Western diplomats say there's a growing sense of disenchantment among young Cubans. They say that despite the current tough ideological line, such disillusionment is putting pressure on Castro to change tack, to avoid the popular anti-government demonstrations now being seen in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. But for the moment, there's no sign that by the time Mr. Gorbachev does eventually make his visit here, Fidel Castro will have dramatically redefined the direction for the country into which these young Cubans will grow up.